I'd like to introduce myself and the team. Over there we have Brett Wilson, Ted Gettin, Benjamin Trader, and I'm Adam Whiting. So we're here to talk about the cloud and networks, infrastructure, connectivity everywhere. But what does this really mean? I mean, people talk about how there's going to be information available to everyone all the time, but there's a significant challenge in that. So how do we harness this information to make the world a better place, to make an impact, to help people better their lives, and, oh, by the way, to keep our customers happy as well? That's a challenge that I hope you ask yourself as we move through this presentation, and make sure we answer it. So as we jump in, I want to give you an idea of what our 2015 world looks like. So we have an increased data capture. What that means is this idea of the cloud. It's storing all the content from our devices, storing the content from our cars, from our toasters in the Ericsson video, from people inputting the data, from our iPads, from our iPhones, from our service devices. Tons of data. The challenge in this future world is how do we utilize that data effectively and harness it to make a difference? We're going to help with recommendations to address that area. Another thing we see is increased collaboration and reduced organizational inefficiencies. That arises from the shortening of communication channels. People can talk easier. People can communicate region to region, office to office, and across cross-functional areas. So that shortens those lines of communication, makes collaboration easier, and it reduces redundancies because when I figure out that I can do something easier, more quickly, I can share that easier than it can today in this 2015 world. So our next challenge is how do we adapt the Ericsson organizational structure to take advantage of those trends? Finally, empowerment. And this one's really big. This is putting information in the hands of people who can use it effectively and immediately. This is having the right information at your fingertips at the right time. And it's not something that's easy to do. So as we move through the recommendations, I want you to focus on these three areas and how we're going to capitalize on them. So kind of taking that step from this 20,000 feet view of this future world, let's now zoom in and say, what are the recommendations that Ericsson can start working on today? There's two of them. One big one is education. Education is ripe for technology. It's ready for technology. Our teachers' classrooms are growing. There's more students in every classroom. Teachers have more pressure on them than ever, on their time and on their resources. So let's use technology to take some of that pressure off the teachers, to allow them to personalize their teaching for their students, to give them more free time back. Technology can enable this, and we will show you exactly how it can do that. Also, why not, as part of that personalization, have the educational history of a student follow them? One of our colleagues went to 5 different high schools within his 4-year period of high school. His education was never personalized. He never got help day one in the areas that he needed help because the teachers had no idea he needed help in those areas. So why would that educational history not follow him throughout his time? We have the availability. The technology is already there. Let's just put that in place. Also, RFID. There's a wonderful technology that can easily track when students enter classrooms, enter buildings, leave buildings. As a parent, you want to know, is my child safe? Is my child at school today? Did they make it there safely to that safe environment? And when they leave that safe environment, are they going to be home in 20 minutes or should I start to get worried? So you can build this into the child's educational history as well so that the parents can access that, be it quizzes, tests along the way. And we have a business case for this as well, but I'm going to let my colleague kind of go into the financials on that. Now look at the other side of this world. We're talking about the 3.5 billion broadband devices that are connected. So how does Ericsson take advantage of that structurally? Well, Ericsson's in a perfect place as a technology leader to capitalize on this cloud concept. And how do we capitalize on that? We collect the information, but that's not the hard part. The hard part is using the information effectively. In order to do that, we need to figure out a way to synthesize that information so that it can be redistributed back in a useful way into the organization. Best practices can be leveraged through the synthesization process. And once again, we have a business case for that as well, which we'll go into, but suffice it to say that by the end of the 2015 projections year, we project a doubling of the EPS based on this organization reorg. And that's through mainly cost savings due to efficiency, got by the quick dissemination of best practices, which we'll also show a little video to illustrate that. Now I want to take a step even deeper into that educational aspect. How we can change the world, how we can empower students through education. And Ben Trader will walk us through that. Ben?
Thanks, Adam. So, as Adam said, I'm going to talk about education now. Public schools have more access to devices than ever before. Classrooms have iPads, they have iPods, and of course they have computers as well. Students are interacting on these devices, whether taking tests or just doing activities, but what's happening to that data? It's getting lost. And that's where Ericsson can step in and create a solution, a hardware and software solution that's going to gather that data and use it so that teachers, administration, and parents can revolutionize the way that they're interacting with their students and children. Let me walk you through a use case. I'd like to tell you about Ben. Ben's a 10th grade algebra teacher in Chicago. He loves to teach. It's his passion. It's what he likes to do the most. But he spends so much time working on grading papers, working on homework, working on lesson plans, that he doesn't have the time to devote to teaching. What we recommend Ericsson do is empower those teachers with technology. So in real time, they can identify students who are underperforming, identify their strengths and weaknesses, identify ways that they can interact with those students differently in the classroom than they would have without that information. The teacher now is doing testing on devices, and so there's no reason for them to spend as much time grading, and they have more time to do what they love to do most, which is teach. And that comes back to a big question that if you ask any teacher, what do they need more of? They need time. And this is exactly what Ericsson is giving them. They're giving them time to work on things that mean the most to them. What we recommend is first building a software solution. That's going to be a platform that the devices that are within the classroom can connect to this platform and move data up to the platform. Teachers are then going to be able to access that data to identify both real-time information as well as trends and things that are going on in the classroom over several years. Administration will be able to identify on an aggregate level, and teacher and parents may be even identified if something's happening where their student isn't performing at a level that we expect them to. We also recommend doing a hardware implementation where our RFID tags are going to be put into the school and hardware is going to be put into the school, connected to this cloud storage. And again, it's another data input. Parents, teachers, and administration are going to be able to track students and identify, are they at the place that they should be, and are they doing what they should be doing? So the revenue driver that we see here is first, a hardware solution where we're implementing the RFID tags, and the platform solution where we're implementing software that's going to change the way that these teachers are interacting with their students. Just this past week, we've identified a unique opportunity where the Chicago Infrastructure Fund announced $7 billion funding into the Chicago area schools in the Chicago area. Ericsson could partner with the Chicago Infrastructure Fund to implement this idea and really revolutionize this one area that is ripe for innovation and ripe for change. We also recommend that they partner with Teach for America, an organization focused on time and focused on that doesn't have time to interact with their kids because they're in such need-strapped areas, as well as the IST network, an organization that's focused on education and technology and improving the way that those two interact. But of course, education goes beyond just the classroom. I'd like to switch gears into the emerging markets. Emerging markets can get access to devices. Maybe not the iPad and the iPods that we have, but think of 10-year-old devices that can connect to the internet are not quite as expensive as those. On the ground partnerships with either the Peace Corps, the Clinton Global Initiative, or one laptop per child are different ways that Ericsson could identify markets, identify areas that they could get in, partner with the local carrier to provide an opportunity for these communities and children to access the internet. Hans said something really interesting the other night to us. He said he went through a revolution from the landline to the cell phone, and it was a pretty small jump. Imagine the jump from a child from no connection to a connected internet device where they can access classroom, they can access information, they can access things that they never could see before. It's a huge change that we believe Ericsson should be a part of. Of course, these changes don't come without risks. First, in the public sector, funding is a big issue. Schools don't always have funding, both near-term and long-term. Within the non-traditional education that I just spoke about, of course, the partnerships, both at the government level as well as with these Peace Corps or other organizations, it's going to be critical for them to identify the markets that Ericsson can't get to. So now that I discussed the education and this unique opportunity, I'd like to turn it over to Brett, where he's going to talk about a similar change that can be done within Ericsson that's going to revolutionize your organization as well.
Thank you, Ben. So as Ben talked about with our educational recommendations, what we're really seeing here is leveraging our existing human resources and devices with our network and cloud to drive more value than ever before. And that's exactly what we're looking at with the organization. It's the same concept. We're taking our existing resources and leveraging them through the network and the cloud to drive more value than ever before. And so before we get into that in more detail, let's first talk about the issues that we see with the existing organization. Some of the common issues we see are redundant processes all over the organization. We see best practices being stuck in silos and not being able to be shared across common tasks. We see a hierarchical structure that's designed to promote communication that in reality inhibits communication of these types of ideas. And so first and foremost, we believe we need to focus on reducing organizational inefficiencies to allow this information to transmit across the company even faster. We think that the only way the company can succeed going forward is to be more efficient than they are today. You cannot remain the same company you are today and still be successful in the future. So now we also see issues where the market is getting extremely competitive. It's relying heavily on innovation, both sustained and continued. And large and global companies are popping up left and right that are competing in this space that are here to stay. And for a company like Ericsson, they need to look in the mirror and see themselves and still have a plan on how they're going to win. And so that's where we come into harnessing collective expertise. We've got over 100,000 employees generating new great ideas every day, and we need to be able to sift through and pull those ideas out and leverage them as quickly and effectively as possible. So what we're really saying is we've got devices creating tons and tons of data, but it's not the fact that we have better data or more data. It's the fact that we can synthesize that data into great ideas faster and better than anyone else. So now let's take a look at our vision of the integrated organization. What we see here are devices. We see mobile devices, cell phones, smartphones, laptops, tablets. We see RFIDs. We see any tool one of our employees might have in their hands, generating data and inputting that into our system, into our cloud. Take Ted, for example. Ted's a technician. He shows up to work and he swipes his RFID on the way in the door. He gets his assignment for that day, swipes his RFID on the way out the door, swipes into his truck, and drives down the road. His GPS tracks him as he drives down the road. He swipes out of his truck when he arrives at the site, swipes into the site, and begins work on the task. He swipes the barcode on the item that he's repairing. He reaches into his toolbox, and it knows that he took out a specific type of wrench. All of that data enters the cloud. Now, you might be thinking that sounds like a mountain of data. This is where we have a synthesis engine sitting in the cloud that takes in all this data and searches for trends. It tells you something like, Ted is doing this job faster than anyone else in the company is doing this job, and it pulls that information out and passes it on to an innovation team that can then analyze that data further to decide if there's real insight being generated here, or if it just happens that Ted's having a good week. So then Ted might know. Ted might already know. He might not need a trend analyzer to tell the world that he's doing things better. He might know that he's doing things better. And that's where he can leverage the cloud even further. He can send a message to the innovation team. He can do an email. He can push a text message. Any way you want, he can send that message to the innovation team and say, I know I have a good idea, and start this process from there. And he can also send it to people doing like tasks and get them stepping up to the best practices immediately. And the last thing is Ted might show up in that site facing a problem he's never seen before. He might then search the cloud for information surrounding the keywords that he's seeing there and find out that someone across the globe has performed that task yesterday. And he can follow their exact steps by channeling all of this information and quickly come up to speed on this task and perform a job that he could not perform yesterday. Now, synthesis is the key here. And where does that synthesis come from? Well, we have no doubt that Ericsson has the software capabilities to build such an engine. But we've also looked at a possible acquisition target called DataSift, who could provide that even sooner. What DataSift does is they go through Twitter feeds and pull out trends just like this, similar to what we're asking our data engine to do. And they pull these out for analysis by the user. Now, recently, this company has been valued at about $30 million, and we think that they're worth that much because we can drive even more value just within our own company by taking advantage of what they bring to the table. Now, we also talked about shortening the communication channels. In this picture up top, we see Ted's idea having to go up to his manager and his manager's manager before it can come back down just to move halfway across the org chart. With this new cloud-based system, we can get that information. We can get Ted's new method across the organization in no time flat. He can send it up to his manager, or he can send it across to people performing like tasks in a matter of minutes. No longer does he have to go up the management chain and back down. And with that, Ted is going to describe a situation where two of our technicians are working on a similar task.
Thanks, Brett. So I'd like to introduce you to a friend of mine. His name is Adam. He's a technician here in Boston, and he loves his job. Now, Adam recently came to BU, actually, to do a job. Now, he loves a good challenge, and this was a tricky opportunity. He was going to install some very complicated software onto a server. So he thought, what can I do better? Well, why don't I try a new diagnostic tool? And sure enough, it worked pretty well. Adam got really excited. So you know what he did? He called up headquarters on the automated line that linked directly to the cloud. He told them what happened. Meanwhile, Magnus is in Stockholm. He's doing a similar job. He's excited. He's got his comfortable clothes on because he knows he's in for a long afternoon. He pulls out his cell phone and his diagnostic tool, and he's getting pretty excited. Magnus, too, likes what he's doing. But as he gets set up, he gets an alert from headquarters. It lets him know that on this job, 4667, there's new standard operating procedures, courtesy of Adam's work in Boston. He gets at the diagnostic tool, struggles with the USB a little bit, but finally gets it right. What he's excited about is that he can do not one, but two, but three jobs in the time it took for one. He leaves the job really excited because he was more efficient with his own time and with his employers. And with that, we think we're articulating why the smart cloud is really going to enable people to work smarter and better. Now, there's risks anytime you invest in new technology and processes. The organization might be nervous about it. They might not accept an innovation team. And even if technology is in your wheelhouse, it's still a risk. But we think the biggest risk for Ericsson is doing nothing at all. And this goes beyond the 2015 vision. This is about this being the right time to make this happen. Fingers crossed, the global recession is finally making its way away from us. It's a great time to invest. At the same time, mobile devices are becoming cheaper and better. Now, I'm not talking about iPads and Kindles. I'm talking about the devices that enable people to access the cloud and utilize the PC as a service. This enables people around the globe to take part in not the information revolution they've been going through, but the skill revolution. We're talking about upskilling people in the under and middle classes. The past 10 years have been awesome for professional classes. Our devices have made us more efficient, smarter, and better. But who's been left behind are those that don't have access to them. Network and devices are going to help the under and middle classes catch up in the next 5 to 10 years. At the same time, Ericsson is beholden to its shareholders, and we value that. This project is going to deliver 5% annualized increase, a $720 million NPV. The beauty of this all is that's just with doing this within the own company. Imagine what happens when we go and deliver this to other companies. It's a beautiful thing. There's a lot of money to be made. $55 million on the Chicago deal. Multiply that by every public school in America, you have $8.6 billion. Finally, I'm wearing my green tie because in Stockholm, they turned out the lights a few hours ago for Earth Hour. We're going to do the same in North America. Ericsson cares about the global bottom line, and that's what gets us the most excited about this project. As we go into the Q&A period, I want you to reflect on this picture. Now, 5 years ago, the most advanced piece of technology in this room was the blackboard. Today, this classroom is wired. And it's not a classroom, it could be a storeroom, it could be a new business. The bottom line is with Ericsson technology and with the new devices, we're wiring the world and empowering people to make better lives. Now I'd love to take your questions.
A quick question just to get us going. You talked about redundancy of processes. Exactly what processes do we have that are redundant so we can go home and shut them down?
So we're not necessarily talking about Ericsson specifically. We're talking about the organization today.
Okay.
The organization that we're going to be able to improve upon and then be the example going forward. So we're not privy to all of the processes that are going on within Ericsson, but we've all, in our own experiences, seen many companies that you could have 3 different managers telling you to do 3 different things at the same time, and they're all trying to accomplish the same goal. So we know these redundancies exist. It's just a matter of removing these inefficiencies from the system and using our network and our cloud and our resources that are available to us to identify those quickly.
Thank you.
My main question is the cloud. I mean, we have a lot of players in this area and big data and so on and so forth. Did you look at competition and partnering? How we would make this happen? Or what would we do totally alone? Or
So what we looked at is the core competency of what we needed. So everybody has the cloud, but it's what you do with the cloud that matters. It's not about storage, it's about doing something with it. And so there's a ton of people in big data, and there's a ton of companies that are worth a lot of money. But the core technology that we knew was important was this idea of taking large amounts of data, whether it's text, numbers, and developing and identifying patterns. One of the cool examples that DataSif's doing is that it's looking at customer sentiment. And so they can know what people are saying in every Starbucks in the world if they're saying something on Twitter in a Starbucks. The other thing we like about DataSift is that they've got great technology, a great team, but they're in a space that's getting crowded, and so we can get them for a good price. And the idea here is that their company, as it's growing, is going to be competing directly with Twitter and other social networks. So we believe that we can take a company based in Europe, integrate them with the Ericsson team, and get kind of a jump start on this in a way that's a lot more affordable than some of the players in this space that are worth billions and billions of dollars.
So $55 million in Chicago. Can we look at the chart? Show me how we make those $55 million.
So the $55 million comes back to something that we didn't get into a whole lot of detail about yet. But this is the opportunity presented by the Chicago Public Schools. This is going in and installing RFID readers, bringing Wi-Fi clickers to the classroom so that teachers can quickly poll their students and generate that data that then feeds into the video we saw about our teacher, who's seeing in real time the types of opportunities, the types of information their students are generating. So what we see here is a projection that shows in a 5-year period where we would be installing RFID cards, Wi-Fi clickers, base stations, all the batteries required, the apps, the development, the installation, everything. And then we bring it down to a total cost per student per year. And when you multiply that out across the entire Chicago school district, we came up with that number of $55 million.
Okay, so is it possible to quantify the benefit side? How do we know that $55 million is a good enough share for Ericsson? What is happening on the benefit side? Why is it not $100 million?
So I think that the idea here is when looking at something that is making an impact in education and going into a market and doing something that nobody's done before, I think Ben mentioned one of the risks is, are people going to want to jump on board something that hasn't been done? So doing it for something that in our calculations is a little bit of a cost plus model, we realize that we can use Chicago as an example. They are willing to invest in innovation. They've proven that in the past few years that they're willing to take risks. And so they're kind of our partner in risk, and we're going to not maybe make the same profit we would on another project. At the same time, it's a proving ground for Ericsson, and there's a trickle-down effect. We go in the public school system, we're making sure that certain neighborhoods are having excellent access to network infrastructure and other tools. We're investing in the community around them, which is building them up more. So we're building new customers for our carriers. We're building new customers for data. We're enabling somebody who might have a business across the street from a school to get onto the network in a way that they wouldn't have before. And that's the model that we're excited about because it's applicable in other markets as well. We've kind of seen the idea of investing in education as something that's really valuable and important, but has this trickle down to the communities around that we can then grow those businesses and again, help upskill and upmarket people that are in under and middle classes in a way that hasn't necessarily been done in the past few years.
Okay, so it's a cost plus model, but did you guys look at the benefit side or you didn't? You didn't have time to do that or?
From a benefit perspective to the Chicago public school system, it's very hard to quantify something that hasn't been done before.
That's fine.
And so,
Just
yeah,
wanted to know if you tried to do it or if you didn't do it.
Yeah, I mean, we tried, but we don't have a number for you.
Okay, all right, fair enough, that's fine.
Thanks.
What else?
When we move from the U.S. into emerging markets that you talked about, do you think is there really a business case, or is it really more philanthropy driven when we start moving outside the areas that have, because these countries don't have any money to invest in the education system today?
Right, so we didn't dive into the financial model of the emerging markets, but what we saw was if you partner with the right organization, so an organization that's on the ground, really knows those local markets. These local economies are trying to build their infrastructure, whether it's the network or whether it's roads or whether it's anything along those lines. And so we do find that there is an opportunity that in the right opportunity, there's people on the ground. You want to be in the right spot when they say, we need an infrastructure, there's a carrier that can support this network, and they can partner with Ericsson for that opportunity. So Ericsson can then make the call, is this a philanthropic effort? Is this a double bottom line effort? Is this something that we can really make money on? So it's having the partnerships in place so that when those opportunities arise, and we know that these markets are emerging and they're getting a lot better and they want to get smarter, that they're in the right place in the right time to capture those opportunities.
Were you, maybe I missed it, did we quantify the benefit to Ericsson and any numbers, or when we did the organizational change and we made information flow
Yeah,
laterally instead of going up and down, where are those numbers?
yeah, absolutely. So, Ted, why don't you go ahead and flip to that. This is going to be a lot of numbers all of a sudden on the screen for you here.
Yeah.
But what we did is basically take your consensus analyst forecast and kind of push that out over time. So I don't want you to get too bogged down in the actual projections, the actual numbers. The point of what we're getting at is actually on the next slide. And you see here that this is where we're getting our cost savings. So the savings basically comes into that service model. You were saving 0% in the first year on the service model because we actually take into account the implementation cost of what we're proposing. Now the second year, we're being extremely modest. Say you get a 2%. Say Brett usually fixes 100 computers. Now he can fix 2 more. So you saw he already fixed 3 more in that same amount of time in 1 minute on the video. So anyways, we'll save 2%, but we're not saving 2% on all of your COGS. Don't get me wrong. We take that down by your percent of your number of employees that are field employees, 55% according to the latest 10K, and also scale that down by how much of your COGS is a payroll expense, as opposed to expense for materials or supplies. So I am discounting that 2% number, and then obviously you're going to increase more and more over time. We capped out at this 5% and left it at that 2015 vision. We can go ahead and extrapolate that out farther, but you can see as you gain more traction on it, your best practices would eventually, hopefully you'd have best practices in almost everything, and you'd be realizing this full 5, 6, 7% savings on a terminal basis. And you could go ahead and project that out. So that bounces back up into the financial projections and gets you to the $730 million on the net income line on an MPV basis over that 4-year period.
Is there anybody else trying to do the same thing in terms of competitors? It sounds so easy, just make this guy do, 2, 3 things. Data sift, buy them for $30 million, big data, process it, and it's all cool. I mean, is anybody else trying to do the same thing?
Well, the benefit to Ericsson is that they sponsor the case competition here and be the first one to hear these ideas.
I see. But jokes aside, competitive analysis.
So we all worked in organizations that were pretty big. A lot of us have experience working in those where you have data and you have different models to try and disseminate information. So over the summer, I worked in an organization where they had an internal Wikipedia, but there was a lot of redundant information. There was a lot of data that was deprecated that wasn't really relevant anymore. There were other examples that we had where there were different models where the pieces seemed to be in place, or maybe one part of the solution was in place, but we didn't find anywhere all of those solutions were in place. And the innovation team is really the kind of unique cog, that and the synthesis mechanism of getting data sift to go through the data. So you're going to have a team, almost like a best practice team that can identify great opportunities. That's hopefully going to work closely with R&D as well. And then you're going to have the technology to bubble up that right information. So it's not so much that there isn't anyone doing any one thing, but we didn't see anyone that was doing the entire solution that we brought forward.
Have you considered on the internal solution, have you considered if there are any legal implications, union implications, cultural shifts needed in order to make such a change in an organization
So
globally?
there's no question that when you try to implement something like this, you're asking people to do more than they do today. And we're not just talking about fixing the 2 extra widgets or whatever the technician is doing. We're talking about when you have a good idea, taking the extra effort and inputting it into the system and doing more than you do currently do. And that's where the incentives come into play. That's where we say this is an imperative for big Ericsson, not just the employee in the field today. And we incentivize these guys by saying we're going to give you financial rewards. These things will be, your accomplishments will be noted in your year-end reviews, and we make them want to be a part of this.
But you don't just ask them to send in ideas, you also ask them to provide information by logging where they are and what they do. So I was more into...
Sure. Well, so most of that was not much out of their day. They're wearing an RFID somewhere on their body with their badge. And so we're saying, you walk into the building, you didn't have to do much more than swipe your badge like you already have to do. Now in your car, you're getting in and it knows you entered the vehicle. And so a lot of this is automated, and it's not actually requiring much more out of your service technician on a day-to-day basis.
I'm thinking more about integrity and sort of the company will know more about what you do and where you are and how long it takes and how... Is there a risk to that part of the equation?
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely a risk in taking additional steps to track your employees or to know where every UPS truck is on the road at any given time. You know, it's harder to stop at Starbucks for a cup of coffee in the morning if you're tracked on your UPS truck, right? But the end goal of this is to increase the competitive advantage that Ericsson has by leveraging the technology. And if they're able to do that through a system such as this, if they're able to make my job 10%, 20% easier, then I'm on board with that. Because that makes my life better, and it's better for Ericsson and all the employees at Ericsson as well.
Good answers.
Thank you.
Okay, I just want to thank all the teams. I think what you see is the caliber of all 16 teams in this competition. And let's just have a round of applause for the 4 that just presented.